was he okay driving? I mean, was he?
Oh,
Yeah, he was like,
like it's his own.
yeah, right.
And he was,
Yeah.
yeah, he was
More paper and more paper. I burn trees every day.
That's okay. So do I.
We're the first one doing it.
Can we make a pair of coats?
Sure. More
Why
information.
not? Usually I hang mine over the back.
Okay. About?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Thank
Okay.
you. I hadn't even considered that. Okay. Hi.
So,
I think there's one on
you know,
the
what
turn.
you can do, you walk in, type in,
So I was thinking over here tonight, I wonder
and it'll give you what that was that you know. And it's probably most of them, I don't know, like, one or 0 1 or something like that. Huh? Okay, and then the language in those browsers is either admin no password or admin password, right? Okay. It's probably admin, right? That's usually what it is. If it's like a home-based router, no security. But, I mean, if, oh, and you disconnect them. Gotcha. I see. Gotcha. Is the rest of your crew coming?
Yes, there's enough.
Oh, gotcha.
Space in there.
Okay, cool.
She's very excited.
Yeah, I know. What's up? Oh, yeah, I can grab some. Yeah. Or there's some in the back of the chairs.
One here.
Yeah. Yeah, you just,
The one I had last week from the back of the didn't work.
oh, no. Try that. Is that good? Yeah, I took them all up last time and then nobody used it, so I put them all away.
I grabbed it.
Yeah, look at that.
He's sitting right over there. No, of course, good for hair. I'm the million.
Are you going on what I read or what I wrote down?
What's that?
Are you going on what I wrote down?
No.
We're in and out of here in what, 40 minutes?
We might run a little short of that.
That's what I said.
Yeah, I think we might be out
Another
of here.
brother-in-law has cancer and he's
So,
trying
No,
to
take some better.
and another brother-in-law had a stroke back in January.
Do first aid class online first.
He went to see that.
you gotta do first aid.
Yeah, me and Bob got to go for CPR, child CPR, ED training on Wednesday, Thursday.
I don't know.
There's an online, 30 online courses there to take. We'll go there. It's a bunch, you know, just sit there and
It's idiot proof. You're right. Hello.
He said that he burns trees on a daily basis.
You guys leaving Friday, Brad?
Huh?
You guys leaving Friday?
Yeah.
The game Sunday morning at 8 o'clock in the night.
Oh, yeah, you guys got that tournament. I'll tell you, it was ugly this week. It was ugly. Hello, hello.
No. Don't think so.
I had a question. Sure.
All right. Be that way. Marlene moved in, but actually.
Okay. All right, we're going to get rolling. Thanks for coming back for round two. A couple things before we get started. It was brought to my attention that one of our dates is on Election Day, November 7th, right? And my apologies, it didn't even occur to me. I mean, I thought about Halloween, and the election was so big in my mind that it just completely slipped. So at this point, I don't want to push into the week of Thanksgiving because of the number of people that travel during that week. So we're still going to have that third session on Election Day. If you need to be late, you got to do what you got to do. I always vote really early anyway. I go over I'm standing in line at 6:30 in the morning, let's go. But my apologies, it didn't even occur to me, and then it got brought up, and my mistake, right? So anyway, so that's just a housekeeping issue there. So this second section, today we're going to talk about discipline. And when we talk about financial discipline, what we frequently talk about is budgeting.
And truthfully, this is kind of my favorite part of it because I'm a numbers guy. I do taxes and I enjoy the numbers. It's a puzzle to me. And so for me, it's fun. The other thing that I find is that when I've talked to people about budgets, it's almost never as bad as they think it is. It's usually better than they think it is. Because when we start looking at budgets, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, people find money all over the place that they didn't realize that they had. And sometimes just recognizing the ins and outs it makes a big difference. But just like last week, we're going to start with a video. I'm going to preface this by saying that this guy's name is Louis C.K. He is a comedian. It's a clip of him being on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, so from a few years ago. And it's partially humorous, and we're going to talk about where it really cuts to the bone and gets truthful. Okay, so take a watch. And my apologies, there's a little bit of a rhythm in the background that I didn't hear when I downloaded the clip, but it's there. The words are on the screen as well, so you can read it if you can't hear it very well.
I spend the money. I don't save it.
Yeah.
I don't believe in saving money. I think it's arrogant.
It's arrogant to save money. Yeah.
Because you could die.
Yeah.
And it's like holding in a breath, like breathing. I'm not letting it out. I worked hard for this, you know.
Right.
It's not a good attitude because I have children.
Yeah.
And I should be saving for them, and I'm way not.
Not saving?
No, it's really bad. I'm so not preparing for their future or even near present.
Wow.
I'm not. They have no idea how close to oblivion they are right now. If I die tonight, they'll be homeless tomorrow morning.
Wow. Yes. Money is not an
here's
issue.
the thing. Why should they get the money?
Yeah.
I did the shows. Why do they get the money?
Right, yeah.
I don't believe in it. I don't believe in raising your kids rich.
Right.
Is the worst thing you can do for them, or really more for the people that they're going to impact later in life.
Okay, and I stopped it there because he gets a little inappropriate in a few minutes. But thinking about what he just said, so he's talking in a joking manner, but he's saying, hey, I don't save money, I spend it all. Right? My kids have no idea how bad off we are. And I think what we find in society is that frequently this is really the case, where we have kids, young adults, who are part of the financial equation, who have absolutely no idea where the family's at, right? And so I talked to you a little bit about me growing up and kind of what we went through, and that was absolutely the case. So our idea of budgeting was what's getting shut off today, right? Because that's what was getting paid. Whatever utility that was going to be cut off today is what was getting taken care of. We would worry about the one that was getting shut off tomorrow. And truthfully, I never knew where we were financially, except I knew it was not good, right? But it was never, hey, this is how much we have to spend on this, or this is why we can't get this. It was very gray in our family. And man, that makes it difficult growing up to understand when you get into the time when you got to start making these decisions, to start making good ones. Because all I was concerned about was what was getting shut off tomorrow. I'm 18 years old, and okay, well, the only thing I got to worry about today, there's nothing getting shut off, let's go out and party. Great, right? I must have money. The other thing that he talks about is raising kids rich. And I think this is another problem. And this is really, for me, where this clip really cut to my heart. Because when we raise kids rich, and boy, do we ever right now, right? I mean, the kids today have everything that I never knew I ever wanted, right? I mean, they have stuff that I couldn't have even dreamed of as a kid. And we have to be really careful that there's not an expectation set that can't be fulfilled when they become an adult. So, further on in the clip, and I'll edit out the not so nice words, but he said, the kid that gets a Corvette when he's 18 years old, how can that kid ever be, hey, that kid's so sage, so cool. He had a Corvette when he was 18. He really understands life, right? I mean, that's not how he learns, right? And I think what we see in society today, I know this. There's been studies done, and more kids stay at home longer now than they ever have. Would you agree with that? So you have kids at home 35 years old, right? Because they can't afford the lifestyle on their own, right? I mean, if I got a Corvette at 18 and I turn 21 and I got to move out, how can I afford the insurance, let alone the house payment and the food, right? And so, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that kids stay home. I mean, for goodness, I wish I could have lived at home until I was 35. The cool stuff I would have had, right? It would have been great. Now, my dad wouldn't have been able to stand me, right? I probably would be dead. But, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have them stay at home as long as we're teaching them good values and the proper way to approach the money. Because at some point, they got to go out and do their own thing, right? All right. So I'm going to start this with a part of the Bible. It's from 1 Corinthians. And it says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." And basically what this means is that you are who you hang around. And it doesn't just go for friends, right? And so I've had many conversations with my son over the last couple years about, he's 10, so he's to the point now where, boys do stupid things. And he's getting to the point now where the stupid things are worse, right? And they're going to continue to get worse. And so I'm trying to have these conversations with him about how he approaches his friends. And I've had this conversation with him many times, that he's only as good as his group of friends are, because they will pull you down. They can also pull you up. When we talk about this from a financial perspective, I kind of look at a family unit as like a team, right? It's a team on money. And so if you've got somebody who is just doing all the wrong things, right, it drags the team down. So you all got to be pulling the same direction. You got to be rowing the boat the same way, right? And we have to be careful, again, how we are teaching our kids, but also how we are interacting with our spouse or significant other, because there's got to be an understanding, right? You've got to have an agreement on what the end goal is, right? If there's a disagreement there, it's going to end in disaster. It's not going to end well. So you got to be careful of who you keep in your company. So as I was working on this segment, my wife's a great influence in my life, and I had already made notes. And she said, "Hey, one thing you got to talk about." I said, "What's that?" And she said, "You got to talk about the word deserve." And I had already written it down, right? I was already there. and it's good because we're both kind of on that same page. But in today's society, and especially in marketing, there is this word deserve used a lot. And I hear people say it to themselves even, where they say, "Hey, I deserve a new car," or "I deserve a better house," or "I deserve a great vacation." And it kind of makes me angry, right? I really kind of hate that word. It makes me angry, and it also kind of makes me laugh. Because if we look at kind of how we are as a people, and what the Bible tells us, the only thing we deserve is death, right? Because we're all sinful people. So really, the only thing we deserve is to not be here. Everything else is a gift. And so when people say that I deserve a new house, or I deserve a bigger house, or I got to go vacation in Hawaii this year, it's great things. And certainly, maybe you've earned it. Maybe you've worked really hard. But I hate using the word deserve, because it makes it seem like something is owed to you. And I think as soon as we put ourselves in a mindset of being owed something, we stop working towards it, right? And so, I would hope that, when people, hopefully they would change their vocabulary to try to get rid of that I deserve mentality, that word, because really the best way to be financially at peace is to understand that it's a gift. See, and we're going to talk about this in the next segment in 2 weeks, but when you get a gift, the thing that comes out first is gratitude, right? And it's not about, I'm entitled to this. It's something that you're receiving for nothing. I didn't, when I open gifts on Christmas, and by the way, on Christmas, this is just a personal thing, I hate getting gifts on Christmas. I hate it. I love to give gifts on Christmas. I don't like getting gifts on Christmas. And it's just a personal thing, but when I open the gift, it isn't because, I washed their car last night, or because I'm such a good guy. They're doing it because they wanted to do something for me out of the goodness of their heart, right? And that's sometimes, and for me, it's hard to receive. But it's in direct contrast to that deserving attitude, right? It's an attitude of gratitude. And so we're going to talk about that in contentment. If you can look at things as gifts, contentment becomes a lot easier to achieve. So today we're going to talk about budgeting. And I highlighted the two definitions of budgeting that I kind of wanted to focus on. The first one is the B, a plan for the coordination of resources and expenditures. And C, the amount of money that is available for, required for, or assigned to a particular purpose. And there's nothing here about how much you make or how much you spend. Right? It's taking how much you make and fashioning how much you spend around that. And what I hear a lot today, and this is from clients, from friends, is that if I only made a little more, everything would be easier. And I got to say that I don't think that's the truth. I think sometimes people think that. Not sometimes, a lot of times people think that. But, and this is going to be funny, hopefully. So I don't frequently quote rappers, okay? But Puff Daddy said it best. He said, more money, more problems, right? Because that's really what you get. As you earn more, it is in our nature to spend more. And as we earn more, it only complicates the issue. It doesn't simplify the issue. And when Louis C.K. earlier was talking about raising kids rich, he's kind of talking about this, is that money complicates people, right? Because when we talk about people being rich, Somebody once said to me that, that being rich only allows you to be more of who you are. And so if you're a jerk already, you're just going to be one raging jerk with a lot of money, right? And if you're somebody who is really a giving person, you're going to be really philanthropic, right? You're going to be a really good giver because you've got the resources to do it. So the money doesn't change who we are. It only makes us more of that. And sometimes that's not always a good thing, right? You got to look at who you are first. I'm going to back up here. So the other thing with budgeting, when I talk about doing somebody else's budget, it's easier for me to look at your budget and to do it for you because I'm really good at spending other people's money. Right? Do you guys know anybody else that is like this? Our government, right? I mean, really, they are really good at spending money that isn't theirs. Right? And you need to look at kind of what you're doing with your money in the same way. We talked last session about the money being God's, right? It's not our money. So what am I doing with it that He would approve of? Just like we would hope, I mean, you know, it's election time. We just talked about the election a few minutes ago. And I find it funny every election cycle. Like about 2 months before the election hits, all of a sudden, like roads are getting paved everywhere, right? I mean, have you ever noticed this? Like there is road construction going on, like on every street in Stowe and Cuyahoga Falls. Like it's all over the place, you know. So because if I'm driving down the paved gold road, I'm gonna vote for the right guy, right? But it's always harder to do your own budget than it is to do somebody else's. Because I can look really objectively at what you do because I'm not in your shoes. When you look at yourself and you look in the mirror and you have that thing that you like to do that might cost a little too much money, but you still really like to do it, it's hard to take it out of the budget. For me, it'd be really easy because I don't like to do it, right? So it's easier to be objective when you're looking at it from outside. So if you are in a situation where you are budgeting with a partner, I think it's real important that you each create your own and see what matches and then discuss what doesn't. Because my wife and I over the years, like we certainly don't agree all the time about where to spend money. We're very good at talking about it and coming to an understanding. You know, she normally wins. It's all good. All right, so talking about budgeting and how the Bible says we should budget or talks about budgeting. In Luke at 14, it says, "For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.'" Basically, what they're saying here is, you've got to have a plan. You look like a fool if you don't have a plan with your money. And I think that this is especially true in families, because where does not having enough over a long period of time end? Where does being upside down end over a long period of time? It ends in bankruptcy, right? I mean, really, that's where it ends up. Legally in our system, in our society today, you end up in bankruptcy, right? 100 years ago, you would have ended up in debtor's prison, right? I mean, they would have shipped you off to Australia because that's where all the prisoners went, right? And then you'd be in Australia now. That's not so bad, right? The beaches are great. All right, so why do we budget? Plan for the future. All right, I'm going to tell you, first of all, and I want you to think about this. I'm going to show you, because I pulled out everything out of my pockets today. And I don't want you to necessarily pull everything out of your pockets, but this right here is why I budget. What's in my hands, right? And I'm going to explain this a little bit. So first of all, on this, I have a house key and my car keys, okay, which for most people represents somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,500 to $2,000 a month, okay, that I carry right here, right? Okay, and I carry that with me everywhere I go. And then in my wallet, I carry 4 credit cards. Okay, now I carry more than some because I have 2 business cards and 2 personal cards. I would say that most people carry 2 or 3 credit cards. Okay, and again, talking about averages, the average balance on these cards is about $20,000. Okay, $20,000 in outstanding balance, and so these represent another $600 or $700 a month in payments. And then we get to this great thing, right? Technology. And man, I wish they would have never invented these things. They're the best things that I wish I never had, right? I mean, because they are so useful, and yet this costs me somewhere between $200 and $300 a month, right? Just so I can play games. Right? The games are really fun, though. And so we're walking around with like a hand grenade in our pockets every day, right? And so where I'm at in my financial journey is that those 4 credit cards that I hold, I don't have any balances, which is, I'm blessed to say that. But I've got $80,000 in credit availability. Like, if I wasn't responsible, I could be in real trouble tomorrow, right? Because really, I could go out and have a really good day, right? And some people think that way, right? I mean, if I've got available credit, that means I have money. And so you have to be careful. And so this is a huge reason why we budget, right? I mean, these are things that we want to have, but we have to do it in a responsible way. But truthfully, the reasons that we budget, the first thing we have to do is we got to understand where the money's going. And I think you might find this of yourself. I certainly find this of me. I think most people don't know where all the money goes. I can't tell you how many times I've had people come into the tax office and I do their tax return. And I'm showing them the tax return that I've completed. And at the bottom of the adjusted gross income, it says $102,000. And they look at me and they go, that can't be right. How can I not have any money left after $102,000 in income? Because they have no clue where the money goes. I mean, it's scary. And so the first reason we budget is to understand that. So the second thing that we do is we make adjustments to change our financial outlook. And whether that's budgeting for more income, or whether that's budgeting for less expenses, or hey, maybe you're absolutely pleased with where it's at today and it stays the same, but you can make adjustments, but you can't make the adjustments unless you are informed on where the money's going. So the third reason, and I think this is one of the most important ones, is that we make decisions ahead of time for things that we know that we're not going to make good decisions at when we're faced with the decision. Let me give you an example. I like to enjoy a beer every now and again, okay? And if I go to the bar and I decide to go out with a couple buddies and I have no budget, I have no control over what I'm going to spend, and after I've had a couple, do you think I'm going to be more or less in control of my money? Right? Buy the bar around, right? I mean, this happens, right? This has happened to me Not that I've done that, but I've been sitting there and they're like, the guy over at the bar just bought the whole bar around, and I'm like, well, fantastic for me, but oh my goodness, that's crazy, right? And that's kind of a way out there scenario. But what I'm saying is that if you budget, if you're going to go buy a new car, and you don't know how much you're going to spend, buy the Mercedes, right? I mean, shoot, why not? Right? It's all credit anyway. So you budget because you know that you know, hey, my limit on this car payment is going to be $400 a month, and that Mercedes is going to be $900. Well, that doesn't fit the budget. So you budget because you need to make those decisions ahead of time so that you're not faced with those face-to-face decisions. You can make it when you have a clear head. The next thing we do is that, and for a lot of people, I think this is the most important thing, is that you have to assess your debt and figure out how to clear it. And so the question is some debt good? Yes, it can be. Is no debt better? Yes, it's absolutely better. Right? So there are some types of debt that are good, but you need to be able to make that decision ahead of time. You need to understand how long it's going to take, and we're going to talk about the cost of debt here in a few minutes. But you need to be prepared to look at your debt and see how quickly you can retire it. The more quickly you can retire debt, the more quickly you can retire. Because, and again, I mean, I see this all the time. I have people who are in their late 70s who have $100,000 mortgages and who stress every day about how they're going to pay for medicine because they can't pay for the house and medicine at the same time. Right? And that's sad. So we need to try to retire debt as quickly as we can, and doing a budget helps us do that. And the last reason, and we already talked about this a little bit, but is so that we can compromise ahead of time with the people that are on our financial team. So if I've got my budget and my wife's got her budget, and we don't get together and come up with a team budget, that's going to cause a problem. So we need to compromise ahead of time so that we know where the team can spend the money. So I like sharing stories about my son. He's a smart kid. That comes from my wife, by the way. We had a conversation, and he actually initiated this conversation a couple years ago. He had been over at a friend's house, and so like I told you before, I live in a reasonable house in Cuyahoga Falls. You know, we're on a postage stamp lot. We have a reasonable house. It's great for what we want. But he had been over to a friend's house who lives in Silver Lake in a very nice home. And he had come home from Silver Lake, and we were sitting at the dinner table and we were talking, and he asked the question, and he said, "Why don't we have a house like they do?" And I almost laughed. And I said, okay, I'm going to let you make the decision, right? Because you get to drive the car right now. You get to make this decision. I said, because your mom and I, we already had this conversation and we made the decision, so I want to know what you would have chosen. I said, you know, we could either buy a nicer house and live in a house like that, but a couple things would have to change because we have a limited amount of income. Number one, mom would have to go back to work, right? So she stopped working a couple years ago. I said, number one, mom would have to go back to work because she would have to help pay the mortgage. Number two, we'd have to take less cool vacations, right? Because we take one pretty nice vacation every year. So we have to take less cool vacations. And number three, we wouldn't be able to give as much to other people, to be the giving, do the giving that we normally do, not to the extent that we do it today. I said, so let me ask you this. Which would you prefer? Do you want to live in that house or have these things? Because that's really what it comes down to, right? You have to make a choice. And he looked at me and he goes, oh, that's easy. He goes, I don't want the house, right? But I think it was a really good learning opportunity for him because he didn't understand at the time, why can't we have it all? And so it was like one of his first big budgeting moments, right? So we talked about this chart last time, about this inexperienced, learning, experienced, and mature budget type, where early in our lives we are spending every dollar that we have to live. And then we move into the learning phase and we start doing a little bit of spending, or a little bit of sharing and a little bit of saving. And as we become more experienced, we really start to kind of get in our groove and we're giving more and we're saving more. And then when we're kind of the expert, our expenses go down dramatically, and then we can be real savers and givers. And so hopefully this is going to help you move to the right on this chart, right? If you're spending every dollar you have, hopefully we're going to get you to the next step. And hey, if any of you are in the expert category, you can. I'll talk to you. We'll get you up here. And certainly, I'm not even close to being there, but I know people who are, and I look up to them. I try to emulate what they do. So, talking about debt and what the Bible says about debt, in Proverbs 22, it says, "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender." I think that's a really powerful statement when we talk about budgeting and debt. Because the truth is that as long as we are a borrower, we are beholden to somebody other than our spouse and God. Right? We have to answer to them almost first because they have dominion over us. If we don't pay our mortgage, what are they going to do? They're going to take the house. If we don't pay the car note, what are they going to do? They're going to take the car. And it's really important that we take that power back and eliminate those creditors. It's real interesting when people go and try to get pre-approved for a mortgage. Do you think the bank approves them or pre-approves them for the very smallest amount that they could buy a house for? Or do you think it's the absolute most the bank is willing to risk on them to get them a house? Right? It's absolutely at the very highest end. And so I see people who, they say, oh, well, I was pre-approved for a $400,000 mortgage. And I'm like, you make $80,000 a year. How is that possible? Right? I mean, really. I mean, as a family, you're making $80,000 a year. You can't afford that. But the bank says it's okay. Why? Because the bank's in the business of what? Making money, right? They don't care whether you're in a comfortable financial position or not. Right? They're trying to extract as many dollars from you as they can. And the more they can lend you, the better off their balance sheet looks. I've never had a mortgage lender say, you know what the wise thing to do would be to take half of this. Right? They want you to take the whole thing. All right, so talking more about debt here. I want you to consider some things about debt. First thing is $20,000 in credit card debt. And I'm sure you guys have seen some numbers like this in the past. This is just some review so we can kind of get to the same point. $20,000 in credit card debt at 15% interest. By the way, that is a low interest rate today. The average interest rate on credit cards is somewhere between 18 and 22% on average. And And I can say from personal experience, okay, so I've got an 800 credit score, and my interest rates on my credit cards are 18%, right? There's no such thing as a 7% interest rate on credit cards anymore. It's 18%, 22%. If you make the minimum payments, it's going to take you over 47 years to pay off $20,000. And it's going to cost you $33,000 in interest on $20,000. And that's without charging an additional dollar, right? That's if you just stuck with what you have today, that's what it's going to take. And so when we're talking about credit card debt, what do you think is the absolute worst thing to charge on a credit card? What do you think it is? Food, daily living expenses, right? If you cannot pay it off immediately, it better be a long-term purchase, right? It shouldn't be clothing, it shouldn't be food, it shouldn't be your utility bills, right? Because if you charge those things and you cannot pay them immediately, you're putting yourself upside down from out of the gate. So if you're going to charge anything on a credit card that is going to, it better be a long-term purchase, and you better have a plan to try to retire that debt quickly. Because otherwise, hey, I got a really good deal on whatever tchotchke that you got at the store, and I got it for 50% off. But over 47 years, you paid more than that 50% back, right? It was no deal, right? So an auto loan up $20,000. So this is calculated at 5% interest. Your payment's going to be $400 a month over 5 years. It's going to cost you $3,200. $3,200 in interest, which really, all things being equal, is not terrible. It's $3,200 less that I would like to pay. I would like to keep that money, right? I have better uses for it than to give it to the bank. And the one that really gets the biggest bang is your mortgage. Because you take a moderate mortgage, $150,000, at 5% interest, which is a pretty common rate today. If you take it and pay it over 30 years, you're going to pay an $800 payment for 30 years. It's going to cost you $140,000 in interest. $140,000 in interest on a $150,000 house. You just paid for it twice. I need to get into banking, right? Right. If you were to just cut that down to 20 years, your payment would go up to $190 to $990. Your interest cost would go down to $87,500. So you would save about $52,000. And then if you were to cut it again 5 years and you were to take a 15-year mortgage, you would have an $1,185 payment. Now, by the way, this is without taxes and insurance. This is just the mortgage. But your interest would go down to $63,500. So you can save yourself, what's the math there? $86,500 by taking a 15-year mortgage versus a 30 and paying a little bit more each month. And it's really crazy how powerful this is. And here's the crazy thing. 30 years is not the longest mortgage they'll give you today. They'll do 40-year mortgages. Right? I didn't even do that math. That would just make me angry, right? I mean, it's crazy. So one of the things that my father-in-law taught me, and he's been a real big influence, obviously in my wife's life, but also in mine, is, he said, look, do what you can to retire the mortgage as fast as possible. And so we took a mortgage in 2002, and we were pre-approved for about $300,000. We bought a house for $125,000. In 2 years into our mortgage, the rates dropped, and so we refinanced to a 10-year. So we originally had a 15-year mortgage, and we refinanced to a 10. So it took us 12 years to pay off the house. And it was not without sacrifice, because you're paying an extra $300 a month That's got to come from somewhere. And so there are things that we didn't do in order to do things now. And so really that's the choice, right? Is it a now or a later decision? Because anything that you are going to take debt on today, to do today, is going to reduce your ability to do stuff later, right? Would you agree with that? Because any amount of money that I have to pay in interest is going to affect my ability to do things later. And so really it's got to come down to a personal decision to forego some things today so that later can be real good. Okay? So when we talk about budgeting, and we're going to get into some budgets here in a few minutes, but when we talk about budgeting, you really kind of got to take a look at what you do, and it even comes down to the small stuff like Starbucks. So my niece is here, and she knows I despise Starbucks. I don't like Starbucks. I don't like their coffee in general, but I don't generally buy coffee out. And the reason is this right here, is that your average Starbucks coffee costs $2. And if you bought one 5 days a week, just the weekdays, 5 days a week, you would have spent $520 on coffee that could have cost you $0.25 to make it home per cup, right? So that's a savings annually of $455. So $455, I can do some damage with that, right? I could go and have a pretty good time with $455, and really, I don't like coffee enough to waste it on coffee. And I'm certainly not saying that some people love Starbucks, and hey, if that's your thing, cool, right? You just got to understand what the cost is. Every time, so there's like 86 Starbucks in like the 3-block area here, I think. No, I mean they're like on every corner, right? And it blows my mind that like every morning when I drive to work, I drive past one, and there is a line every day. And then when I go home at 9 o'clock at night, there's a line at 9 o'clock at night. And I'm like, I'm missing something, right? I'm missing something. I don't know what it is, but certainly they would not open 1 million Starbucks if they weren't making money at it, right? The other one, and this has become a bigger problem over the last 20 years. There has been a tremendous shift in eating out versus eating at home. But your average dinner for a family of 4 is about $40, and I would say that's a minimum. A minimum is $40, right? And so if you're eating out, you're going to tip, and so you're talking about $48 every time you hit the restaurant, right? To cook that same meal at home, it's going to cost you less than $15. Now, the bummer is everybody's got to eat the same thing, right? How terrible is that? But it costs $15. So if you just cut one meal a week, if you ate one meal less out a week, you would save yourself $1,300 annually. I mean, that's astounding, right? I mean, $1,300. I could almost pay for a vacation with that, just to eat at home one extra day a week. And I understand that and we fall prey to this. There is something going on every night of the week, right? I have a 10-year-old who plays soccer and who's in Scouts. And then we do stuff here at the church, and and then there's work, and you work some late nights, and it's always easier to just stop and get a bite. But we really do our best to try to eat at home as much as we can. And up until I would say probably a year or two ago, so for the first 13 or 14 years of our marriage, one of our budgeting items was that we limited ourselves to one night a week. Saturday night was our eat out night. And if we couldn't eat at home, we were packing, right? Because that was our budget. We were budgeted to eat out on Saturday nights, and then we would go out for a small lunch after church on Sunday. That was what we ate out for. Now, it's gotten a little bit more than that over the last couple years, but that was a decision that we made because that was the easiest way for us to conserve money. Okay, so who budgets? I think I told you this in the last session, but about 30% of Americans actually work off of a budget. 30%. And the interesting thing about that is that of that 30%, most of those people have household incomes over $75,000. So the people who need to budget the most don't. Right? Because stuff will just work out. I'll just pay what's getting shut off today, and I'll worry about tomorrow. But that's really crazy to me that the people have this in and out of money, and really they have very little control over where it's headed. So the question then becomes, how do we budget? And there's a whole host of ways to create a personal budget. And there's not one that's necessarily right or wrong. It's what works best for you. Okay? And so I just listed 5 of very popular ones here. We have the envelope budget. Have you guys heard of the envelope budget? Okay, so this is where it's called putting every dollar to use or to work, right? That's what they call it, right? And so what you do is you separate out into envelopes, and you basically operate only in cash. No credit cards. Whenever you get paid, you cash the check. You put the cash in that you're allowed to go out and have fun with. You put the cash in for the rent or the mortgage. You put the cash in one envelope for the utilities. And if I'm going to go out to eat and I take the envelope and it's empty, guess what I don't get to do today? I don't get to eat out, right? And so it's a very simple way to control yourself, but it's also very labor intensive, okay? This is one of the things that Dave Ramsey talks about. He does an envelope budget. And again, it's effective, but it's very labor intensive. Then you have this 50-30-20 budget. Have you guys heard of this 50-30-20? Yeah, he's heard about it. Okay, good. So the 50-30-20, basically you split your expenses into 3 main categories, which is your necessities, your savings, and then your fun. So your necessities is 50%, your savings is 20%, and your fun is 30%. And it's a very broad-based budget. It's good for those who have plenty, right? Because you don't have a whole lot of control, right? You don't have a whole lot of control on the money. Then we have I'm going to skip snowball budget. We'll do that one last. The reverse budget. The reverse budget is you start by paying yourself first, right? Have you heard this before? Pay yourself first. So you put money into a savings account, right? And so you direct a certain amount of money to savings, and then everything else comes later, right? Which again is great if you have adequate money coming in, and it's a very good way to drive savings. Okay, good one for that. Then there's a zero-based budget. Zero-based budget is similar to the envelope budget, where basically you're accounting for every dollar. You're basically budgeting out to zero, right? There is zero excess. Everything is spoken for. Again, you have very good controls on that, but it's also very labor intensive, right? So there's a ton of different ways to budget. The snowball budget is a debt-based or a debt-focused budget, and this talks about snowballing debt. And I kind of like this budget if you are in debt or you have debt. This is something that we did. The way the snowball budget works is that if you have, for discussion, you have 3 credit cards, and each of those payments is $50 minimum. I might take my three $50 payments plus an extra $50, and I'm going to focus on the one card first. I'm going to focus on the highest interest rate first, or the smallest balance first. Okay? And so I'm going to put $100 on that every month until it's gone. And then when I'm done with that, I have a free $100, right? And that goes on the next card. And now I'm paying $150 on that card until that one's gone. And now on the third one, I'm having $200 a month go to that until it's gone, right? And so it builds the speed in which you pay off your debt, which works really well if you have debt. And we're gonna utilize that a little bit. The budget that I would like you to consider, you're not going to find this online. This is kind of something that my wife and I, this is kind of what we did. And we call it a God first budget. And so, you guys have never heard this, right? This isn't like a term commonly used, right? Okay. So, when I'm talking about a God first budget, when we budget, we're taking and making priorities, right? We're making priorities of certain things in our life. So we're saying, okay, the first thing that needs to get into the bin that we need to get paid off first, or that we need to pay first, is our mortgage, right? Because I got to have some place to live. Then the second thing that is most important is the car, because I got to get to work. So I'm going to pay the car second. And then I'm going to put the food and the clothing next, right? And so what we're going to talk about on a God-based budget is, let's set aside His money first. And we're going to talk about how we're going to use His money. And then we're going to do everything else, because honestly, that's the most important piece, at least in my mind. So in Proverbs it says, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. And basically what God's saying is, look, I've instructed you on how you should handle money and how you should give back. And if you do that, if you trust me, you're going to have everything you need, and then some. And it's a weird thing to say. It works. It's crazy. So, again, my father-in-law, he started talking to me about this like very, very early in our marriage. And he and his wife went to a tithing class at their church. And he was the only one working, and he was a school teacher, not making a whole heck of a lot of money. He worked in the summers doing other odd jobs to, again, bring in more money for the household. And he went to this tithing class, and they kind of talked about it, and he said, look, we're going to try this. We're going to do it, and we're going to see what happens. And he said, look, we did this, and he said, I think it was 1980 or 1981. Okay? Single income, family of 4. He said, the minute we started doing it, he said, I haven't had to think about money since. He's never had to think about it. Not that he's wealthy, but he's always had enough, right? Because he did it the way that God asked. All right, so we're going to take 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about how to do a God-based budget. So let's take 5 minutes here. Again, feel free to bring in, if you want to bring in water or coffee, just don't spill it. All right, we're going to try to get going again here so we can get finished. So in your packet of goodies I've given you today in your paperwork, I've given you 2 double-sided sheets that have sample, we'll call them God budgets, okay? And the one I'd like you to look at first is I'd like you to look at the beginner. So it's at the top left-hand corner. It'll say beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert. And what I want to talk about is how this God-first budget works for us. And what I did is I used a very modest number, $4,000 a month or $48,000 a year, okay, which is, for this area, is modest. We're going to talk about what the averages are locally here in a few minutes, but we're looking at total monthly income. So if you look at the monthly income section, we have 2 people making $2,000 a month, or a total of $4,000 in income. And so if we look at the beginner budget, we're going to start with 10%. That is, we're going to call it the God portion. So we're called as Christians to give 10% to the church. Right? Would everybody agree with that? That's the tithe. Okay? Now, it's not something that you can do sometimes out of the gate. It takes some discipline. It takes some time, some learning how to do that. But what we're going to do is we're going to start by taking a tenth or $400, and we're going to set that aside, and we're going to call that the God portion. And this is going to be kind of our roadmap on how do we get to where God wants us to be if we're not where He already wants us to be today. And so notice that I listed that first. And I think if you go back and you look at your cash flow analysis that I gave you last week, you'll notice that I put charity way up at the top. Did you guys notice that? Because I think it's important. Okay, we said last time that we have 3 major expectations or uses of our money, right? To take care of ourselves now, to take care of ourselves later, which is saving, and then to take care of others. And those are the 3 things that we're called to do with our money. So we're going to take 10% out to do that, and then we're going to list everything else out that we have. And we have a total expense list of $38.65. Now, this isn't necessarily going to be your budget, right? This is just one I created, a sample. So we've got an extra $135 a month, sweet, right? It's a good place to start. Now, one of the things that I always do when I do a budget is I always budget for unexpected expenses. Because in my experience, there's unexpected expenses every month. They're kind of expected unexpected expenses, right? Because every month my son has a birthday that he has to go to that we have to buy a gift for, right? Or I got to get tires for the car, or something breaks in the house, right? And it's not something I can budget for each one of those individual things every month, but I always create a unexpected expected expenses, if that makes any sense. So that's what that other $300 is at the bottom. And so then I break down my God portion at the bottom. And I say, okay, I've set aside $400 as my God portion. Now, I know that I've got to make baby steps here, right? So some of that's going to go to the church. Some of that I'm going to use to my debt pay down. And some of that I got to put in savings. What is the savings? How much savings should we have? What do the experts say that how much savings should you have in the bank at any time? 3 to 6 months of expenses. 3 to 6 months of expenses. Because if you lose your job, if you get injured, right, you've got to be able to ride out a storm. Okay? So if that number is 0 today, you've got to start putting something in there. And so if you're starting on that far left-hand side where you're spending every dollar you have, if you start putting aside just $50 a month, and you start giving a little bit to charity, and you start paying down your debt, you get to graduate, right? And you flip that over and you get to go to the intermediate. And in the intermediate, I've been putting $250 towards my debt service. So guess what? That credit card that I had earlier that I was paying on, that I had $250 on in the first one, is now gone on my second budget. And so now what gets to happen? That $250 that I was paying on the credit card goes into my God portion. Right? So now my God portion went from $400 a month to $650 a month. And I carry that down to the bottom. And what I do is I increase my debt pay down number, and then I get to increase my giving amount, and I get to increase my savings amount. And so I'm doing even more, and I'm paying down more. And now the transportation costs that I have, which is currently at $550 a month, which is approximately, so just on an average, right, $350 to $400 a month for a car payment, and then another couple $100 to operate the thing, right, between insurance and fuel and oil changes and that kind of stuff. So now I'm going to take that additional $300, I'm going to use part of the snowball budget, and I'm going to increase that, and I'm going to put it on the car because I want to pay down the car next. And so once you kind of work this for a while, you get to move to your advanced budget. Now notice here, I haven't changed how much I'm making. I'm changing where I'm spending it. So now my $550 transportation cost is down to $250. And guess what happens to my God portion? It goes up again. And so now my God portion, I get to increase my debt pay down again. I get to increase the amount I'm giving to church or to other charities. I get to increase my savings. And now I'm really starting to roll, right? Life's getting easier. I feel better about what I'm doing. By the way, this is the hard part. You've generated for yourself an additional $550 of available cash a month. Not letting that money leak into other stuff is hard, right? It's hard to not take that $550 that I've been so good about moving away from debt and not saying, hey, what I really deserve is a nice vacation, right? What I really need is a new car. And so you work on that advanced budget for a while, and then you get to the expert. And this is not a 2-year process. This is a lifetime, right? But this is something that you get to maneuver through over a period of a long time, a lifetime. But in this one, you notice that my housing cost has now gone down dramatically because now all I'm paying is taxes and utilities, right? I have no mortgage. And so what happens to my God portion? My God portion goes up to $1,650 a month. Out of $4,000, we're talking about 40%. And then I get to go down to the bottom and I get to put a lot of money into savings and I get to give more than 10% out. And that's when it really gets fun. So we talk about the things that we want versus the things that we need. We talked about that a little bit last week. And we talked about, having a car that I pay a whole lot of money for to impress people I don't even know. Right? Why is that important? I mean, you want to have a reliable car, I get it. But it can be reasonable. I think the same thing goes for your home, for the clothes you wear. Here's the truth. I don't know about you guys. I don't ever want to be rich. That's not my goal. What I want to be is I want to be comfortable. I want to have the things I need. And I want to be content. Because you kind of go with the people that you hang with, right? You act like them. And so you got to be careful on what the end goal is. Because we can have riches here on earth, or we can have them up in heaven, right? And so I'd rather have them there than here. I'd certainly like to have enough money to be helpful to other people, right? That's what I want. I want enough money that I can be a blessing to other people. I don't necessarily need to have the nicest, newest, greatest things. I don't need to be Bill Gates. I don't need to be, Donald Trump. I don't need to be Warren, what's that, Warren Buffett? Yeah, that's his name. So anyway, so just something to think about there. So I want you to look at your next sheet. And this has got a couple of things on it. This has a BLS average budget. The BLS is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is a national average on what people spend and earn. And it was I couldn't put it up on the screen, it's too small. But the average income in the U.S. is about $75,000, household income. And this is from the very poor to the very wealthy, right? That's the average. And if you look at some very interesting numbers, the housing is 25% of the money. 25%. That's a huge number. I think taxes are probably a little overstated here. I think they're talking about like Social Security, Medicare, and stuff like that too. I think the taxes are probably a little high. But the interesting thing, somebody with $75,000 on the average, their charity giving is 3% a year. Well under what we should be doing. You have a second chart there. It is the Economic Policy Institute, and you can go online to the Economic Policy Institute and you can type in your zip code and it'll say, this is what we think you need to live in Stowe, Ohio in 2017. And this is the numbers they gave. So they said that you need $61,500 a year to live in Stowe. And truthfully, I think that's low. I think it needs to be higher than that. Because when we look at how much they attributed to housing at $750 a month, I would challenge you to find a house in Stowe for $750 a month. Doesn't exist. There was one of them and it's been taken already, right? I think the taxes are pretty close. They talk about child care and transportation, healthcare, other necessities, and they lump other necessities. It's a very large number, so I don't know really what they're talking about what is necessities, right? That's a real interesting discussion there. But then I have a what-if budget at the bottom. And this is where we are kind of aiming for. This is what we're shooting for. I'm not looking to earn $1 million a year, $2 million, $5 million a year. But what if you could earn $75,000 a year and have housing just be your taxes and your utilities? And your transportation be limited to $300 a month, which is just your insurance and operating expenses. And you see, our entertainment, we could increase our entertainment budget to $3,500 a month, which is robust, right? That's a lot of money to be spending a month. That's almost $1,000 a week. Or excuse me, that's $3,500 a year. Sorry, $300 a month. But our charity and our savings goes up to 20%. And we're doing the right thing with $15,000 a year. And the interesting thing about this kind of layout is that even after we pay everything out, we have an excess of almost $9,000 a year. Okay? And so it's not really about making more. What's the easiest way to save money? Don't spend it, right? So when we're infants, what's the first command word that we learn? No. How do we forget it when we become 35 years old? We've heard so much. Right? I mean, seriously. So you get people who are like, well, hey, we're going to go on this, we're going to go on a cruise. Do you want to go? No, I can't afford it, right? And so the most important thing you can do by budgeting is learning how to say no effectively. And I was talking to somebody about this a couple weeks ago, and they said, well, I can't budget just $250 a month for other expenses. I said, what do you mean you can't do that? They're like, well, but I get a call every week, and my girlfriends want to go out, and they want to go for dinner, and then the next week, I get another call, and it's wine night, so we got to go to wine night, and I'm like, did you forget? No, because you can easily use that, right? No, I can't afford it. It's okay. I think that people don't use their budget in their defense. Because I will tell people when I can't do stuff, no, it's crazy. I can't afford that. And maybe I can afford it. I don't want to afford it. Right? And that's okay too. That's okay too. So, the interesting thing about budgeting is that it is not a fast process. It's tough and it's long. But in Proverbs it says, wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. If you're good about being a little by little kind of person, it sticks. And truthfully, I obviously don't have everything figured out, right? If I had everything figured out, I'd be much thinner, right? Right? Yeah. Lots smarter. So we've got this figured out pretty well. But it's not easy, right? It's a day-by-day decision that you make. And as you progress into having more and more available money, your expectations get higher. Right? Your expectations of the people around you, right? Because you become a resource for the people that don't have enough. And that's a blessing too, right? I'm happy when they call. I can't always say yes. But certainly there's a higher expectation. But there's also a higher expectation from God. Right? I've given you a lot. I expect a lot. It's the same thing I would say to my son. If I give you a lot, I'm certainly going to expect a lot out of you from it. Okay? So, talking about the upcoming season, right around the corner we've got Christmas, which is the absolute worst time of the year for budgets. Would everybody agree with that? I mean, basically what people do is that, like in December, they go, and they tear them up and throw them in the trash, and they go, we'll figure it out in January, right? And hopefully we get a tax return, and I can pay all of my Christmas debt with my tax return. But I've got an idea for you. And this is something I really want you to think about trying, because it works tremendously well. This is something that my wife and I have done many times over the last 15 years. And I want you to consider this. How about a spending fast? So what is a spending fast? What we have done in the past is we have taken periods of time in our life, and we have said, look, if it's not absolutely necessary, it doesn't get done. So we have gone through 6-month, 1 year, 18-month periods where we have said, no new clothes unless they're absolutely necessary. No new clothes. We're not eating out. It's not happening. No Starbucks. Right? I mean, even to no car washes. If you're washing the car, it's at home. So you go on a spending fast. And what I would challenge you to do, if you really want to make Christmas different, if you've had trouble budgeting for Christmas in the past and you want to make Christmas different this year, because I know everybody wants to get gifts, right? And I get that. But if you want to make Christmas different and about something else, go on a spending fast for November. Just November, 1 month. Take all the money that you saved from not eating out and not going to Starbucks and not washing the car and not buying new clothes, and take that cash, and that's your budget for Christmas. Because what will happen is that you'll have what you'll have. It'll be enough. Trust me, it will be. It'll be enough. And on December 26th, when the dust settles, there's no bill hanging over your head. And it's a beautiful thing. I'm saying you should try it. You should think about it. And like I said, over the period of years, we've gone through times where we've said, look, this is something that we need to get done to the house. This is something that we want to purchase. We want to go on a vacation. But it's not going on the credit card. It's not happening. So how do we achieve that? We are going to take a fast until we can do that. A couple years ago, and this is probably 10 years ago now, we were on one of these spending fasts, and my wife finally looked at me and she goes, I got to buy some new clothes. I got to do it. And I said, okay, and we agreed. We agreed to what the budget was, because we had been on such a long spending fast that it was time. Because you have to buy the stuff eventually, right? I mean, the clothes wear out. You have to do that. She needed a new pair of shoes. There was a wedding coming up. So it can't go on forever, right? You've got to break it. But if you would think about doing this, I think it'll change your perspective on what Christmas is and how it stresses you out. Because money's the biggest problem during that time of year. And for those of you that have kids, tell them what you're doing, right? Unless they believe in Santa, then you got a bigger problem. But seriously, I mean, if they're involved in the finances, say, hey, look, this is how we're going to fund Christmas, and this is going to make January so much better, right? Because we're going to deprive ourselves today so that we can be better tomorrow, right? That's how it works. You don't get both, right? You got to pick. Okay. So the interesting thing, and I'm going to close on this. I told you that my wife and I, we don't always agree on money. And we both get the wantsies, right? It happens. And I'll tell you, it happens to me every year. It happens to me every year because I work tax season. I work about 100 hours a week. I mean, and that's no exaggeration. I work 7 days a week. I take 1.5 days off during tax season, and that's Easter, and a half a day for my wife's birthday because she gets to go out for dinner. Right? And seriously, that's the day and a half I take off. And I got to tell you that come May, I'm itching to spend money. Because I have been working my butt off for 4 months, and I have seen zero benefit. Right? I haven't gotten to touch, feel, taste anything. I'm eating crock pot meals at the office every day. I don't even get to eat at home, right? And I've been deprived a little bit. And so every year in May, I go a little crazy, right? And, we've gotten to understand what that means. And we set a budget for that too. But my wife, a couple years ago, and she goes through this every few years, so I think I'm due again pretty soon. She said, hey, would you like to get another house? She's like, I think I'd like to move. And I'm like, you must be out of your mind, right? This is what I'm thinking, right? The house is paid off. What are you nuts? But of course, you can't say that. So I said to her, hey, if you want to move, it's great. Pick the house. I don't want to move again in 5 or 10 years. This is going to be a one-time deal. Make it the dream house. But here's the deal. If we move, you got to go back to work. For 5 years. You got to go back to work for 5 years so we can pay down the mortgage. Right? This is the trade-off. Suffer today for what we can have tomorrow. Right? And so we actually went and looked at like 2 or 3 houses. Beautiful, beautiful homes. Way nicer than what we have today. And so we're sitting in the living room one day. She looks at me and she goes, I'm good. I'm like, score. Right? So I know this is coming up again soon. All right. So it is 7:30. I have a couple of pieces of homework, and we're not going to meet next week. We are going to meet the week following, which is November 7th. So I want you to think about 3 things that you can live without. 3 things you can live without that you regularly have today, right? And maybe that's Starbucks, not to pick on them, but, it's Dunkin' Donuts. Maybe it's eating out less. And then in your packet, I've given you 6 budget templates. 6 budget templates. I'd like you to try this for 6 months. I want you to complete your November budget template, okay? And by the way, there are many different ways. So what I use is I use something I downloaded. It's on Excel. That's what you're seeing there that's printed out. There are a ton of apps out there that are free if you want to use your smartphone to do your budgeting. That's great. But complete a November budget for me, and we're going to talk about, the next time we get together, we're going to talk about the hardest thing that we're going to talk about this whole period, and that's about contentment. Because that's a hard thing to achieve. All right? I did have a question. Somebody wanted a short question and answer session. So, a couple minutes. So do we have questions about stuff? Okay, so right, okay. So the question is, where do you put the extra money income into your budget, right? So unexpected income, right? So grandma gives you $50 for your birthday, you get a tax refund, you have a mileage check that comes in from driving your car for work, that type of thing, right? So if you look at your budget template, there is actually a line that says other income. And so what you don't want to do is you don't want to budget for these things, right? Because like tax refunds are great for doing special things like paying down debt or fixing something at home or taking a vacation, right? So you can take care of some things with the tax return. You can put that in the realized, in the actual column. Don't put it in the budget. Does that make sense? Because you can't count on that every month. Yeah. Nope, don't put it in there. Right. Hey, here's the beautiful thing. If you budget based on what you know you're going to get, and that's always extra, it's extra. Right? That's beautiful. All right, any other questions? Yes?
What is the amount you're supposed to do for the savings? Because on here it's always 0.
What's that?
What is the amount you budget for savings? Because on the paper, it's always 0.
On which paper are you talking about?
On your family budget. Yeah, on the family.
Oh, gotcha. So what I did is I moved that down into the God portion, right? And so how much should you be saving? Well, ideally, it's 10%, ideally, right? But I think that's only ideal for people in a certain age and income bracket. Because I think if you're 55 or 60 and you're going to retire in 5 or 6 years, it might be 20% or 25%. If you're 25 years old, it might be less than that. It might be 6, 7, 8%, right? So that number is going to change as you're available. And that's why, when I talk about the God portion, as that God portion grows, you can increase savings, you can increase the giving, you can increase those things exponentially. But you got to get rid of the debt first. And if you're already free of the debt, then that number could be huge. It could be 25%.
Mine actually is related to paying off a
Excellent. Yep. Okay, so here's the question. At what point, if you're in a retirement phase, should you pay the mortgage off or should you not pay the mortgage off? And really, here's, I think, the big question there. Because you're gonna transition from an income generating to a fixed income, right? And so the question is, do you want to deplete savings in order to get rid of the mortgage? So at a $30,000 mortgage, you're really only paying like $1,500 a month or $1,500 a year in interest, right? Something like that, okay? And so I think really what it comes down to is a comfort level with the amount of cash that you have, okay? And I'm going to say first, I am not a certified financial planner, right? That's my disclaimer, okay? So don't sue me, okay? But really what it comes down to is that there is comfort in cash. There's comfort in cash, right? Do you agree with that? And I'm not saying like cash like dollar bills. I'm saying that there is comfort when you have enough money in the bank that you know if something goes awry, you can handle the problem, right? And if you pay off the mortgage, what does that do? And so I would say you can do one of two things. You could pay it off. If you have enough cash, pay it off. It's better to not pay that $1,500 a year to the mortgage, to the bank, right? It's better to save that $125 a month or whatever that is, right? Right, exactly. The other thing you could do if that comfort level isn't there to liquidate the $30,000 to pay it, what you could do is you could, while you're still working, pay off the mortgage and go open a home equity line of credit, okay, with a zero balance, okay? So let me give you for instance, so we did this, right? So I have a home equity line of credit that, I have a $100,000 line of credit available at 4 or 4.5% interest, right? Now my balance is zero, so how much interest do I pay? Zero, right? I mean, I pay a $100 annual fee, right? But if something should ever happen, I can go make a draw on the line of credit at a very low interest rate and solve a large problem, right? Does that make sense? So I could basically go extract the $30,000 again if I needed to, right? But I'm not paying them the interest while there's no problem. And so it kind of hedges your bet a little bit. Does that make sense? So you pay off the main mortgage, all you have left is a home equity line of credit, which is there in case of emergency, you don't use it, but you also don't pay the interest. So that kind of hedges your bets. And that's, that's just a way to approach it. But really it comes down to a comfort of cash. Okay. So that you eliminate the debt, right? What I'm saying, and the reason I'm saying that doing it before you retire is that it is easier to get a line of credit while you're working. And so if you did it today, right, you can go get the line of credit. Because really whether you pay it off today or in 6 months or in a year, is there really a huge difference, right? But it's easier for you to go and generate that line of credit because you have a larger income base right now, right? So the bank's more likely to give you that at a lower rate. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else? Excellent. Not next week, 2 weeks. See you in 2 weeks. Enjoy Halloween. Thanks.